Hello, and welcome to the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. My name is Ryan, and I am a self-proclaimed Calvin and Hobbes superfan and expert.
And my name is also Ryan, although most people call me Indy.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes. Today we'll be discussing the time machine, which is going to be a lot of fun. But before we jump into that, let's just note, as we always do, that we're not affiliated with Bill Watterson or his syndicate. We don't have the rights to Calvin and Hobbes, so we can't display any of the comics that we're discussing. So if you want to see them, we will provide a blog post with a link in the show notes that will give the dates of publication that you can look up on Go Comics if you have a subscription. And we'll provide the books and page numbers, so if you have the books, you can look the comics up there. So before we get into it, we got an email from another listener. This is from a listener who I think is from Denmark. I'm going to do my best to pronounce the name here. So it's spelled Jeppe. I think maybe in Danish that would be Jeppe or something like that. I apologize if I butchered it. But he sent us an email and he said, first of all, many thanks for making this great podcast. I have been a lifelong fan of the strip, and your meticulous analysis about the strips are in every episode revealing details and perspectives I haven't thought of before. So
Wow.
that's nice praise. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yeppa.
And then he says, I grew up reading the strip in its Danish translation and thought maybe you'd be interested in that. He said he wrote a small blog post that covers a bit of the strip in Danish and sent me a link. So I went ahead and read it, and it was interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and include that link in the show notes. So listeners, if you would like to learn a little bit about Calvin and Hobbes in Danish and our friends' experience coming to learn about and read Calvin and Hobbes in Danish, you can go ahead and check that out.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And we've a little bit on the show from time to time talked about like translation issues and whether things come through or not. So yeah, that might be actually fascinating to see what kinds of alterations were made for linguistic or cultural reasons, or just if things hit differently in a different language sometimes.
Yeah, I told them neither of us really knows anything about the international translations. I've never read it in another language,
Yeah,
so it's fun to get that perspective of someone who grew up with it in another language and
oh,
what that was
definitely.
like. Yeah, so thank you. So now we're ready to jump in, and today we're going to talk about the second cardboard box invention. So the first one was the transmogrifier, that was episode 9, and now we're talking about the time machine. So just to give a little sneak peek, next episode is going to be all about dinosaurs, and that'll release on Dinosaur Day, which is June 1st, and it's going to have some awesome guests that I am so excited about. We've actually already recorded that episode, and it was such a blast. So we hope you'll enjoy that one as much as we did. But the time machine seemed like a good preamble to that, since 2 of the 3 time machine stories involve dinosaurs, as we will see.
It'd be kind
So,
of weird if
with
they
that
didn't
said,
involve dinosaurs.
well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could time travel to other times, but if it's Calvin, why would he go anywhere else?
I
So,
mean, we actually will find out why he would go somewhere else, but
there's
dinosaurs
one
are
reason, yeah.
certainly a popular draw.
Yes. So, let's talk time travel. And before we get to the cardboard box, which is the time machine proper, there are a couple of other strips involving attempts at or discussion of time travel. So, we've previously talked about how Calvin's dad explains the theory of relativity, with his explanation being that time goes slower as you go faster because you keep changing time zones, but that only works if you're going west.
And in fact, there are certain westbound flights in the US where your arrival time is actually before your departure time. So there is some evidence for this theory,
Yeah, I think Calvin's dad is onto something.
but only if you go west, of course, like he said.
Well, yeah, if you're going east, then that's, I mean, I don't see how
Yeah,
that
then
could ever
time goes
possibly work,
slower,
but
and no one wants that.
yeah.
Not while you're on an
Now,
airplane, I guess.
it goes slow enough already.
Yeah, I mean, in general,
Now,
that might be cool to slow down time, but yeah, not when you're stuck on an airplane.
yeah. Actually, we'll talk about slowing down time in a little bit, but first, there's a strip where Calvin says to Hobbes that if they go fast enough in the wagon, they'll end up in the future because they'll time warp. So they talk about all the cool futuristic things they can tell people they saw, which implies that they think they have a way back. So I'm not sure how they think they'll go back in time using this method, but I guess they have something.
interesting wrinkle actually, because if the idea is if we go faster, we go forward in time. I mean, I guess there are strips where they go in slow motion, so maybe that would be the way to counteract it.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But in any case, they get to the bottom of the hill. They didn't feel any time warp, but they did end up in the future. By how much?
I believe it's like 2 minutes.
Yeah, it was 2 minutes later than when they started, so they were in the future.
Yeah. And Hobbs says, well, things haven't improved. I'm disappointed.
Yeah, but I think what we can learn from all of this is that we're all time travelers. We just all go forward and at 1x speed.
Exactly. And on a semi related note, there are some scholars who describe our temporal lives as kind of an extension throughout time in the same way that we think of our physical bodies as extended in space. And so the idea is there's not change per se, it's just a different kind of constancy.
Well, I've said this before, but my brain just exploded.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating this perspective. I just think it's an interesting one to point out. And so change over time is really just like an extension through space seen in sections, or rather an extension through time in an analogous way to extension through space seen in sections. So like temporal slices, if you want to think of it that way.
So I guess that would imply that the future is a given and there's nothing we can do to change it?
I think so on this perspective. I mean, there might be some way to debate that, but yeah, that would make sense anyway.
Well, listeners, if your brains just exploded, you can email us at magiccnh. So there's another strip where they explicitly test the theory of relativity. So in that first one, they just said they would time warp, but they weren't specifically equating it to relativity. In this other strip, they actually use the phrase theory of relativity, again, using the wagon. So in this one, they're trying to go faster and faster, and Hobbs is keeping track of time on his watch, which I think it's fun that Hobbs even has a watch. But it looks like a pocket watch, which is even better, because how does Hobbs have pockets?
That actually comes up in another strip, which I won't talk about now, but I think that's a funny, almost recurring gag, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, Hobbs has something. Maybe he's actually a marsupial. But anyway, time doesn't seem to be changing according to Hobbs. He's noting that his watch is still going, they haven't stopped time, and as they sail over a cliff, Calvin asks if time has stopped yet, and Hobbs says, nope, just my heart. But Hobbs does note at the bottom of the cliff that his watch has now stopped, so
It's
I
not
guess
going
it
at
worked.
all. After they land, yeah, that watch has completely stopped.
Yeah, I don't think they'll ever get it going again.
Yeah, so relativity confirmed, right?
Yeah, good job, guys. But quick nerdy note on how relativity actually works, and caveat here, I am not a physicist, so if I get anything wrong and we have any physicists out there who want to correct me, please feel free. But to the extent that I understand it, in relativity, as you go faster and faster, you wouldn't notice a change in time. So your watch would seem to just continue ticking normally. What it is that an observer in a different frame of reference watching you would see their watch ticking at a different rate, so to speak, than your watch is, and you would see theirs ticking at a different rate than yours. But you can't bring a watch with you on the wagon to test whether relativity works. You would need your watch, and you would need a reference watch to compare. So that might be why the experiment didn't work.
Right, so the idea is both you and the watch are in the same frame of reference, so
Exactly.
relative to each other, nothing's going to change. It's only relative to some other reference point.
Right, exactly. So a stationary observer, stationary relative to the Earth, would see your clock ticking at a different rate. And technically, even if you're only going at, the 10 miles an hour or whatever that their wagon is doing, there would be a difference, just such a small difference that we don't have the instruments to detect it.
Right.
But yeah, so it was a methodological problem. They need to revise their methods.
All right, but still, like a decent attempt at it.
Yeah, good first approximation or good first try or something.
Yes, and I believe there's experiments. So as you mentioned, this would be on a very small scale where we can observe like time differences in this way. I mean, not to a super dramatic extent like we might think in science fiction, but where you say, okay, we, given the distance or the effect of gravity on one compared to the other, we do get things that used to be synchronized that are no longer synchronized. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I think GPS satellites, for instance, have to account for relativity to
Okay. Yeah.
remain in sync. And it's like 1 microsecond difference every several days or something, but it adds up enough that it matters.
Right.
But that's a whole other podcast. So
All right. So, listeners, if your brain just exploded again, right to
you can email us. But speaking of time stopping, in another strip, Calvin is looking at his watch and he notes that it's only 3 o'clock, but the sun is setting. And so he shows his dad and says, Dad, look, time has stopped. And Dad says, no, it's just your watch that stopped. And Calvin asks, time doesn't stop if your watch stops? And Dad says, no. And Calvin says, phooey, I thought I'd get rich patenting this thing. And Dad says he would have bought one, which, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, same. That seems like it would come in pretty handy. On a tenuously related note, I guess I'll say, did you ever watch the show Captain N, the Game Master?
Yes, I did. I love that show. I mean, okay, I say I love it. I don't really remember very much about it, but when I was a kid, yeah, my brother and I on Saturday mornings, we would like make a point of watching Captain N.
Okay. Yeah, it was fun. So sort of same here. I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember liking it. And for our listeners who may not have seen it, especially the younger ones, and I don't know if they ever said this, but it must stand for Nintendo.
I'm sure.
Because the plot was Kevin, somebody got like sucked into the Nintendo world through his TV while he was playing, and then he ends up with this group of people trying to, fight bad guys to restore Princess Lana to power or something, who I think is made up, and they were joined by Mega Man, Simon Belmont, and I want to say Pit from Kid Icarus, I think.
I know there was some sort of Kid Icarus connection.
Yeah, but the reason why I thought of it here, which you can probably guess, Ryan, is that one of his like pieces of equipment that he had. Well, I'll ask you, do you remember like what his sort of gear was that he had as Captain N?
Oh man. Okay, so like I say, I don't remember this super well, but I remember he had the duck hunt gun.
Right, the zapper, yeah.
Yeah, and then like on his belt or something, he had an old NES controller that you could push the buttons on it.
Right. So exactly, and that's why this reminded me of that. One thing he could do, one thing you could do with the NES controller was there was a pause button. And so he could do this, like if they were fighting bad guys or got in trouble somehow, he could press pause and like time would stop for everybody but him. So yeah, that's why it reminded me of this, time stopping or watch stopping or whatever. But I also remember even as a kid being like, that seems like ridiculously overpowered and unfair. Like he can just pause everybody else except him. Like,
yeah, wow, I was just gonna say if I had that power, I would just spam it. Just pause. Like, why would you do anything else?
I know. Well, it would be nice to have in real life too. If for nothing else, then it's like, oh no, I was up working and I forgot to go to sleep. Now I know I'll just pause, then I can sleep and I'll get plenty of even something as simple as that. I mean, what an amazing power to have.
Oh man, I would love that. So yes, Calvin, I would buy one of those if you could make that work.
Oh heck yeah. Pretty much any price would be worth it.
Right. Now, on a slightly different note, one more not cardboard box time traveling sort of thing. One time Spaceman Spiff blasts into the fifth dimension, which he defines as a world where time has no meaning. And then, of course, the punchline is, oh man, this class takes forever.
Yeah, which is a math class, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, on brand for Calvin there. And I also thought this was interesting, too, given that time is often referred to as the fourth dimension. And I wonder, is this just a coincidence, or is Calvin aware of that? And so, if the fourth dimension is time, well, you get to the fifth dimension, time has no meaning anymore.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I'm not sure I agree with the logic, but I think Bill Watterson probably knew that. So, whether Calvin knew that, I don't know, but I think that's likely where Watterson was getting it from.
That would make sense.
But okay, so those are all like attempts at time travel, or a fantasy.
Those are pretend time
Spaceman
travel.
Spiff. Yeah, not the real stuff. So
we're talking about the real time travel now.
Yeah, and that requires the cardboard box.
Naturally.
So before we do our time traveling, let's talk about the box. So how do you tell that it's a time machine?
Well, obviously, it's because it has the open side up.
Yes, that is, I mean, what else would it be when the open side is up?
Right.
And when you're time traveling, what else do you need besides the cardboard box?
So the thing that comes to mind is time vortex goggles.
Correct. Because we're contending with hyperspace and light speeds and anything could happen, of course we need goggles.
Of course. That's actually kind of a lot of foresight on Calvin's part. I'm kind of impressed there.
Yeah, usually he doesn't think that far ahead. Now, the time machine does seem to have something to do with going at light speed, because in one strip where they're time traveling in the box, Calvin says, we're approaching light speed, Hobbs. But it seems like that's not the whole picture, because it's not just messing with relativity. There's more going on than that. They go into like a different dimension. So they wind up in this interdimensional space or something, and I think that must have been a lot of fun to draw. I enjoy the swirly and zigzaggy things that are going on when they're in that space.
Exactly, yeah. And quick question, because I don't entirely remember, how does that sort of interdimensional looking space compare to what Spaceman Spiff saw when he went into the fifth dimension?
Ooh. Okay, so I don't have it in front of me, but the time machine, the time machine one is super variable. You get like this vortex-looking swirl sometimes, and sometimes like I say, the screen has kind of got zigzags on it, and Calvin and Hobbes look kind of compressed, and there's a whole bunch of different representations. With Spaceman Spiff, I think it's just like this explosion of stars and planets and lines going by like he's moving really fast, but I'd have to double check. I don't have it in front of me.
That does sound right. Yeah, just
maybe,
kind of occurred to me right now to wonder about that.
Yeah, but maybe it has something to do with the fifth dimension.
It could. Now, I would also add about the time machine, it also seems to fly, but only in tandem with the time traversal function. So it doesn't seem like it flies in general, but it flies as it's going through time.
Yeah.
Okay, now trivia time, though. If you just want to fly without traversing through time, what do you need?
Well, okay, so I've got a couple of thoughts. And so, I mean, one way you can do it is just with pure imagination, because Calvin pretends to be an airplane in one strip.
That's true, okay.
But if we're talking devices, what you need is a magic carpet.
Yes. So we know even the hallway rug, it turns out, is a magic carpet. So you just up, rug, up. And then there you go, off to the city to see your dad's office.
Yeah, well, and I don't know that it actually happens, but when they're first getting ready to go on the rug, Calvin says something like, okay, rug, warp factor 5 or something like that.
Oh, that's right.
So, he's thinking about that sort of thing, even with the rug.
Yeah, because I guess, now Calvin may or may not know this, but I suppose, like warp factor is supposed to be a factor of light speed, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly how it works, but warp factor 5 is maybe you're going 5 times the speed of light, or
I think that's
something.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting whether Calvin would know that or not. Like if I think back to when I was 6, I probably knew about warp speed from Star Trek or something, or maybe warp factor, but I don't know if I knew it was connected to the speed of light at all.
Yeah, not when I was 6. No way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but... Okay.
But, okay,
Moving
so
on.
We've got our cardboard box, so let's talk about our first time machine story. So Calvin shows Hobbes the time machine, and Hobbes says, isn't this your transmogrifier? So Calvin explains the difference, which we've already explained, that now the box is open on the top.
Right. So to the inattentive and brainless layman, yes, it looks like the transmogrifier, but you crawl under the transmogrifier, but you climb in the top of the time machine.
And Hobbs just goes, ah.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
duh. Like what?
yeah, obviously. So they debate whether to go into the past or the future in this first arc, and they decide that if they go to the past, Calvin could ace any history tests that he may have in his future.
Useful.
But if they yeah, but if they go to the future, they could swipe an invention, pretend to invent it themselves, and then get rich. And I have to wonder if that would actually work. I mean, I just think, in 1995, if I had traveled to now and swiped an iPhone, I don't think the iPhone would have been useful in 1995 because there was no Wi-Fi. There wouldn't really have been a way to charge it. It would be a slightly more useful calculator, but even its phone function wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, I mean, you could maybe someone from then would have been able to rig up a way to charge it. That seems plausible,
Yeah.
but the infrastructure and mechanisms it would need to do most of the functions we use it for now just wouldn't be available.
Yeah, well, and I said 1995 because that's when Calvin and Hobbes ended, but this particular story arc actually was going on in the 80s, so even further back. So, yeah. Anyway,
I've kind of wondered about that too. I mean, both with that, like how would that work, or even if you take it for granted, we can get something and say, "Oh, I totally invented this." Like, all right, how does it work? How do we make more? I mean, it's difficult to explain the complexities in only 5 minutes, but Yeah, so I'm not sure how well that would work. Like, but even in general, too, though, did you ever think about sort of the logistical complexities of trying to what I'll call profit off time travel?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so first of all, if you're going to swipe an invention, you have a time machine. What more amazing invention can you have than that?
That's
but,
true.
Okay, so you're trying to profit off time travel, but time travel is a thing, so other people can try to do the same thing, and I feel like it just breaks the whole system.
Yeah, that could be bad. It's like, oh, I invented this. No, I invented this. No, I. It's like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we know, the computer was invented in 4025 BC.
Yeah, I guess we could say we know that.
I mean, it was because I took it back then and invented it.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, all right. So I guess we say depending on how far we go, it becomes less and less plausible too.
Right.
Yeah, all right. So we bring back a computer to 4025 BC. Look, magic box. This bad box, good for nothing. Yeah. So that would be difficult. Even sort of a more general sense, I think there's issues. Like this kind of comes up in a novel I read one time, which, okay, so I'll just say it looks like they do something that is time traveling, but supposedly it's not really. But anyway, for all intents and purposes, there's time travel in this novel. But this character is talking about how you might think like, oh, well, maybe I would go live in some other time or something like the Middle Ages, and they're pointing out, well, if you weren't like a member of a guild for a trade, if you didn't have sort of networks of people around you, you'd be just at best a complete outcast in society. You would not be able to function like that at all. So
yeah,
so and point. That you might have thought, oh, I'll go somewhere like there to avoid other complications and other times, like, oh, I want to come work at this company. Where's your I-9 card? What's your social security number? Oh, well, this looks fraudulent to you, but I assure you it's real. Like, so yeah, it seems like there's a lot of complications from trying to pull off sort of time travel related shenanigans, even for seemingly normal type activities.
Yeah. So I think what we're learning here is just don't mess with time travel. It's not worth the bother.
I mean, yeah, that's good advice anyway. So listeners, if you were thinking about time traveling, think again.
Unless you're going forward at 1x speed. That we would accept.
That's okay to do.
Yeah, it's hard not to, really. But anyway, so once they realize that they could swipe something and get rich, they say, the future it is then. So they decide to go to the future. And this is when Calvin tells Hobbs that they need goggles, and Hobbs asks why. So Calvin explains what I said before. We're dealing with vortexes and light speeds. Of course we need goggles. So Hobbs says, I think I left my goggles in the other room. Just a minute.
Yeah, if I'm not back, you can go without me. Yeah.
Yeah. Get in, you sissy. I already got your goggles.
Again, more foresight from Calvin.
Yes. So off they go into hyperspace, and once they're there, Hobbs says he has to go to the bathroom, which is great.
Now? In hyperspace? Are you crazy? Yeah, so, which brings up an interesting question. What do you think would be the dangers of going to the bathroom in hyperspace?
I mean, it's hard to say, but, I feel like when you're on a road trip and you need to go to the bathroom, you pull over, and, like, if there's not a bathroom around, you just, go where you gotta go. But how would you do that? You can't get out of the time machine in hyperspace. I mean, where would you end up? Like, would you just be stuck in hyperspace? Would you fall out and land in some unknown time? Like, what would happen?
Okay, yeah. No, that actually makes a lot of sense. So you're thinking the pulling over aspect to do it would be dangerous. And that is very plausible, I will say. Like, at best, you end up in some other time that besides what you were trying to get to, which could be very bad depending on where it is. Okay.
Right.
So I was kind of thinking too, like maybe if there's a bathroom on the time machine, which there does not seem to be in the one Calvin and Hobbes had, but if we think of like an analogy to an airplane that's like, oh, I was using the restroom, but they turned back on the fasten seatbelt sign because there's turbulence or something. So if we magnify that up to sort of hyperspace turbulence, that must be, orders of magnitude times worse. So maybe that could be a sort of danger too, if your time machine were equipped with restroom facilities.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Also a good point. So listeners, if you do time travel, just, keep that in mind.
Yeah. Like with a road trip, go to the bathroom before you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So one other follow-up question. Is this the only time we hear Hobbes talk about needing to go to the bathroom?
I can't think of any others off the top. I mean, so when they go to Mars, he talks about wondering what happens if you throw up in zero gravity, but that's not the same thing.
It is a bodily function, but...
Yeah. I can't think of any other time where Hobbes talks about needing to go to the bathroom, though.
Yeah, me neither. All right, so that's what I was curious about.
All right, so they come out of hyperspace, they land and start looking around, and they find this egg-shaped thing, and they start speculating on what it is. Maybe it's some sort of vehicle, but how do you get in? There's not a license plate or anything.
Pod of some kind.
Yeah. And then they see this strange-looking tree, and big surprise, turns out it's actually a dinosaur.
Dude, the egg-shaped thing, you know what it probably was?
Oh, wait. Oh, man. This whole time, I was wondering.
Yeah, it might have actually been an egg.
Whoa. Okay. So, specifically what it is a sauropod of some sort. That's the long-necked, like Littlefoot from Land Before Time, that kind of dinosaur.
But full-grown.
Yeah, much, much bigger. So they get freaked out once they realize, first of all, they're speculating on... why is the future like this? It's all hot and muggy. I thought they'd control the weather by now. And then we see this face behind them, and Calvin says, did you ever get the feeling that you're being watched? And Hobbes says, or that you're about to do a double take? So then they spot this dinosaur, freak out, run to the time machine, and Calvin explains their mistake. And what was their mistake, Indy?
So their mistake was that they went backwards instead of forwards in time because they were facing the wrong direction.
Yeah. So Calvin says, get in the time machine and face the other way so we go into the future. And Hobbes is like, we went into the past because we were facing the wrong way? What, you think I've got some sort of AAA map?
I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense, right? So the future's in one direction, the past is in the opposite, so...
Right. But that leads me to the question of what would have happened if the box had been facing 90 degrees different from how it was when they started?
Yeah, so I've got two possibilities for this one. So I'm thinking either nothing would happen. So it'd be like, it's just no motion or maybe completely canceling out opposite forces or something so the time machine doesn't go anywhere.
Sure.
Or
Okay.
or possibly that means you don't go through time but you travel into a parallel universe at the same time.
Ooh, that'd be crazy. Okay. I've got another option that's much more boring, but I'll just say it real quickly. So I'm thinking maybe it's not the direction that the time machine is facing. Maybe it just matters which direction you're facing in the box. Like, you
Ooh, I
know,
see.
going towards that end of the box means you're going forward in time, and going towards the other end means you're going back in time. But I like the parallel dimension thing better. I'm gonna go with that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, and it could be, that's right, it is sort of ambiguous. Does it mean that it's the way you're facing or the way the box is facing? I mean, in theory, you would think of yourself as aligned with the direction of the box, so it could be either just based on what Calvin says.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, are you putting the car in forward or reverse? It doesn't matter which way the car is facing. It's just there's the front of the car and the back of the car.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question about this. If we think about facing, so Ryan, would you say the future is in front of you or is it behind you?
I mean, I would say it's in front of me.
I would tend to say this also. However, I read a book one time. This was actually the novel Congo, I believe, which sounds like it won't have anything to do with it, but it does. So the story of Congo has to do with sort of ape intelligence. Like there's a gorilla in it that can communicate with sign language, and like the main character is the person who works with her and that sort of thing. But
Right.
anyway, they talk about how the gorilla thinks of the future as behind her and the past as in front of her, whereas human beings tended to think of it in the other way, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
And so the idea is you can see everything that's already happened to you, but you can't see the things that are going to happen to you. So, in this way of thinking, you're moving backwards essentially through time with the future behind you and the past in front of you where you can see it.
Nope, don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, it still makes more sense to me. Like, oh, yeah, we're facing the future. Like, that's in front of us where we're going toward rather than it's being behind us. But I can see the reasoning for the other view.
Yeah, I just, my point of view on that is if I'm driving, what I see in front of me is where I'm going to be. So, that kind of gives me a glimpse into my future of in, an hour and a half I'll be at that mountain or whatever. And I was already at the stuff that's behind me. So that feels like a much more appropriate analogy.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Like I said, I tend to gravitate towards that also. But I do
Yeah.
think it's interesting. That's one of the things I always
Yeah, it's an
remember
interest.
from that novel.
It's a different way of thinking of it. I don't know that it's necessarily wrong, but I still don't like it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so what I think is strange about this is when they were going to go to the future, they were going to travel like maybe 20 years into the future. Calvin said it was hard to pinpoint exactly, but sometime around the year 2000, which would have been 15 to 20 years in the future, depending on when specifically they landed. And they end up going like tens of millions or maybe even hundreds of millions of years into the past, depending on what period of dinosaur time they were in. I don't quite get how that works.
So, yeah, that's an interesting point I hadn't really thought about before. I do have a reason why this might make sense. And so here's what I'm thinking. So, if we think about like the rate of noticeable change over time, that's going to accelerate the farther into time we get. And so what I'm thinking is like especially if we go back sort of even before the dinosaurs, like the formation of the universe or what have you, we're going to have periods where there's not a lot of different things going on. Like we're going to have, certain kinds of chemical reactions and what have you, but that's the same basic kind of thing happening everywhere. But the more complexity there gets in the universe, the more different kinds of things that can happen at any different point in the timeline. And so then there's like a higher density of phenomena that occur later compared to earlier. So all this means that you sort of go through a thicker amount of time going into the future compared to going back into the past where it gets thinner as you go.
Okay, so listeners, if your brain just exploded.
I should also caveat
sure.
too, like, yes, so yeah, that's our goal of this podcast, just explode people's brains. So again, like Ryan, I am not a physicist, so insofar as this is a serious theory and not just kind of a fun thing to say, don't get too mad if there's some horrible problem with it, but that's the best I can come up with as to why we'd have this seeming discrepancy in going into the past versus the future.
Sounds like as good a reason as any. So I guess right now things are going so fast that 20 years in the future is the same as like 75 million years in the past. Well,
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, now we've got a way to measure that, so that's cool, I guess. Okay, they get back from almost being killed by a dinosaur in their minds, and Calvin tells Mom all about this adventure, and she takes it in stride. Calvin observes that Mom isn't fazed by much, although Hobbs notes that the frogs in the toilet didn't go over so well.
Yeah, moms have weird priorities.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the Yukon Ho arc, where he's about to supposedly secede from the family and go live in the Yukon, and he's kind of standing there, it's like, well, so long, Mama's blah blah blah. Calvin, don't stand there with the door open. Go out or come in or whatever. He's like, man, I should have left a long time ago.
Well, and then when he's like, it's been nice living here, but not real nice. Haha, see you later. And then she's like, Calvin, wait. And Calvin goes, leave it to a mother to drag out a goodbye. And she's like, north is that way. You're headed southwest.
That's true. There was that part also. So yeah, moms don't always care about the things you think they're going to care about, at least when you're a 6-year-old.
Yeah. But anyway, they make it home safely, and that's the end of that story. And funnily enough, the very next strip is the one where Calvin's watch stops and he thinks that time has stopped.
So maybe it got worn out due to all of the temporal forces it endured on the trip, or like because it got out of sync with its native time stream.
That's probably what it was.
Yeah. I wonder if Watterson thought of that or did it on purpose, or if it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine at the very least he was, his mind was on that sort of thing. So it was like, well, here's another thing I can say about that.
Yeah, so maybe he had kind of time on the brain or what have you.
Yeah. Now, interesting side story, the next mention of a time machine actually doesn't involve the time machine, but it has Calvin doing a homework assignment saying that when he grows up, he'll be an inventor, and he will invent a time machine, come back to yesterday, take himself to tomorrow, and skip this dumb assignment. Which I find it, funny strip, first of all, but I find it interesting that this strip happens after the first time machine story. He already has a time machine.
Yeah, you know what? That's true. And we did talk about in the Stupendous Man episode how Stupendous Man once turned it back from Sunday to Saturday to at least delay having to do your homework. So, but you're right. It's interesting that at this point, he doesn't just try this in the first place.
Yes, although we will see later an attempt at something like that and how it pans out.
Yeah, and, like you said, it's just a one-off joke at first, but in retrospect, I wonder if Watterson sort of thought back to it and was like, you know what? Let's actually see what would happen with that.
Yeah, I could believe that. That would be pretty cool.
Definitely. And good decision, too. Like, that's one of my favorite story arcs overall, so I'm excited we're about to talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, that one is so funny. And we will get to it, but first, in the second time machine story, Calvin now deliberately wants to go to the Jurassic. He tells Hobbes that they're going to do that, again, with the aim of getting rich. And Hobbes says he doesn't want to be transmogrified or duplicated or whatever, so he's still having a hard time figuring out what the box is when it's one of the various inventions.
That's true.
Calvin clarifies that it's a time machine, and Hobbes says, oh, that's even worse. But Calvin tells him not to be such a baby. The dinosaur they encountered last time wasn't even a carnivore. So, first of all, I think it's fun that we get a definitive shout out to a previous story arc, because that doesn't, it happens sometimes, but sometimes it's just like this one story that involves a particular trope in Calvin and Hobbes is kind of its own self-contained thing, and this other story that involves it is its own other self-contained thing. But it's fun that this is an explicit shout out to the last time they time traveled.
Agreed. I always like that sort of thing.
Yeah. Second, it's true that the dinosaur they encountered wasn't a carnivore, but I would just like to point out that herbivores can be plenty dangerous. As they say in Monty Python, moose bites are nasty. And don't get in the way of an elephant or a rhino. I've seen videos, actually I saw a video of an elephant with a rhino getting in its way, and it did not go well for the rhino.
Yikes.
Sauropods were the biggest animals that ever walked on land. Like, they're bigger than elephants by a lot. So that dinosaur definitely could have squished them.
Yeah, and I mean, even by accident, right? So it might not have been hostile in the slightest, but it could still be very dangerous.
Yeah. And, I mean, herbivores can be hostile. Like, don't mess with a rhino, don't mess with a moose. They will actively attack you.
Right. I think the moose is almost the most, for a lot of us, surprising one because, you know, you'd kind of think of a rhino as a big, dangerous animal, but if we think of a moose as kind of similar to a deer, we might think, oh, yeah, that's, you know, it eats grass or whatever. It's going to run away if I get close. And that is not the case. A moose will charge and attack, so they can be very dangerous.
And they are huge.
They really are. So,
Calvin explains that this time they're going to the Jurassic on purpose and will bring a camera so that they can take photos, and that will get them rich. It will, you know, answer all these questions for paleontologists that they can't get just from the fossils and stuff.
Right.
Which doesn't sell Hobbes on this journey. What does get Hobbes to go?
I think Calvin says something like, all right, well, if you're not going, I guess I'll just have to eat these snacks myself.
Snacks? Snacks? What kind of snacks? I guess it'd be all right to go if we have snacks. If they're
never
good
mind,
snacks,
you said you're not going.
Yeah.
Again, more foresight from Calvin, so he knows what he needs to do to get Hobbes to come along.
Exactly. And so they get in the box. Calvin sets the dial for 140 million years ago. So I think that means they've solved the which way is the box facing or which way are they facing in the box problem. Now they have a dial. So upgrade, you know.
Yeah, that is a better solution. Now there's less room for human error.
Yeah. But point of order, the Jurassic actually ended 145 million years ago. So 140 million years ago would actually be the Cretaceous. But that's just me being that guy. So, you know, once again, if you're writing for Calvin, you only need to know as much as a lazy 6-year-old. So 140 million, whatever, close enough.
Maybe he was kind of rounding to, like, you know, 140-ish million years ago.
Right, yeah. And that actually does work because the dinosaurs we see were dinosaurs from kind of the end of the Jurassic, I believe. So,
okay.
Yeah, good enough. So, as they're time traveling, Hobbes wonders, why don't you get younger as you go back in time and disappear as you pass the day you were born? And Calvin says he'd explain, but there's a lot of math. And Hobbes says, I thought you got a D in math, which I think is a pretty good reason for Calvin not to try to explain.
That's true. Now, I remember reading a story where something like that happens, and this was when I was not too much older than Calvin, actually. So I think I can't tell you what else happened in the story or the name of it because it was kind of a while ago now, but I believe in this case, the person was trying to go forward in time, but the narrator says something like, however, he actually died in year whatever, and so he dropped dead when the time machine got to that point, or something along those lines.
You were reading that when you were 6?
Well, I guess. I mean, it could have been slightly older, but I'm pretty sure I was around that age. like I said, I don't recall exactly what this story was. I just have this vague recollection that that happens in it.
You know, looking back on children's stories, sometimes I'm like, these things are no joke. Like, really? This is what we're reading to our kids?
Yeah, so or and then some movies that are for kids, it's kind of
Yeah.
like, what are we doing? Like, not that there's something graphic or anything, but they're just scary. Like, I can think
Yeah.
of G-rated movies that I saw as a kid, or especially looking back now, it's like, we like kids have that story? What's wrong with us?
Well, I mean, Bambi. Like, enough said.
Bambi can be traumatic. Lesser known, but did you ever watch The Secret of Nim?
Yes.
Yeah, that's terrifying. I
Right?
actually read the
Well,
book as an adult that it's based on. I believe that one's called Mrs. Frimby and the Rats of Nim. So slightly different title, but it's the same story. And it's like, man, this is some pretty
yeah.
heavy stuff that's going on here.
Yeah, well, or like we brought up The Land Before Time. You know, once again, the protagonist's mom dies. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have a bunch of poor orphaned babies trying to like find the adults or what have you. It's like that's pretty
Right.
traumatizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's true. I guess that was kind of a heavy story for a young child to be reading, but whatever.
Yeah.
I do remember though thinking, like, I don't know exactly how foreign my ideas were, but it was something along the lines of, is that really how time travel would work? Or wouldn't it like take you as you are now and just sort of put you in the other time? So I remember at least at that age thinking, I don't think that's how time travel would really function. But
I
I want to ask
agree.
you, what do you think of that whole debate? Like, is time travel more like picking you out of one time and depositing you in another, or does it sort of take you through your own changes through your history?
I mean, I think the second way would be a pretty useless version of time travel. Like, why would anyone want that? So I think when Calvin and Hobbes are in the time machine and they go into hyperspace, that's the math that Calvin can't explain. But it provides some sort of protective bubble, for lack of a better word, around them that
Mm-hmm.
allows them to just be deposited as they are in a different time.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess given what you were saying
Yeah,
about relativity and frames of reference before, that might actually be the more scientifically plausible version
yeah,
in any case.
that, that's true. Yeah. But I think the most important thing here is the snacks because
Exactly.
Hobbes is obsessed with the snacks the whole trip. You know, while they're in the time machine in hyperspace, Hobbes is like, well, I'll take inventory of the snacks, and then Calvin is talking about, could you try not to swerve if we miss our exit? We could fly right into the Big Bang. And Hobbes asks what would happen then, and Calvin says there would be no universe and probably no time. And Hobbes goes, I think we should eat the snacks now.
That's
So,
true. Well, I guess if you don't really know what's going on, you focus on what you can control.
right, exactly. Yeah. So that's the most important thing. But they do arrive in the Jurassic and they see several dinosaurs, including Diplodocus or Diplodocus or however you want to pronounce that one.
Wow, I've never heard
And
the
by the
second
way,
version.
okay, so what's your pronunciation? Do you say Diplodocus?
I would say Diplodocus. However, I will say, we talked about how in our next episode we're going to hear from several dinosaur experts. I know the way they pronounce at least certain dinosaurs was different than how I would always think of it in my head, and I would have to assume that their pronunciation is more correct than mine would be. So I could be wrong here, obviously.
Yeah. So actually, as I understand it, there's not a correct pronunciation for almost any of them
Oh,
because scientists write it down, but in the paper that names them, they don't actually give a pronunciation guide. So it's just almost like, how do you think this is pronounced?
well, there's the
So
problem. They should have putting the pronunciation guys in their papers.
yeah, but they didn't. So you can say it however you want. So
Okay. Well, so
anyway,
any scientists who are listening, remember to do that for your papers.
yeah, Diplodocus, and just really mess with people.
No, it's
But
Diplodocus.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's almost
So
certainly not that one. But
yeah, so going along with that theme, they also see Stegosaurus and Allosaurus, or also Stegosaurus or Allosaurus, if you want to use the more common more boring pronunciations. But anyway, so even if we didn't have quite the right time on the dial, these are all Jurassic dinosaurs that all did live in the same ecosystem, so good job on the accuracy there.
Yeah.
Now, Calvin and Hobbes take pictures of those herbivores, but when they encounter the Allosaurus, first of all, Hobbes says, take a picture of this one. He's smiling. And Calvin's like, just a minute, just a minute. But
yeah, that's an
uh,
interesting interpretation of smiling, too. I mean, maybe to a tiger that looks like smiling, but I don't know.
You know, Hobbes should have realized, oh, that looks like the sort of expression a carnivore gets when they're about to eat. Maybe we should get out of here.
That's true. Huh? He looks like I look when I'm going to pounce on Calvin.
Yes. So Calvin realizes, oh, it's an allosaur. Run, back to the time machine. And Calvin says, get in the time machine and throw them the snacks. Throw it the snacks. And Hobbes is like, you can throw your snacks if you want to. I might still want mine. So again, priorities.
Yeah.
But Hobbes is willing to give up the mushy banana. He's like, here, drops it out of the time machine as they're taking it off.
Which always made me wonder if the Allosaurus would eat that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, our boxes of carnivore and herbivore maybe aren't as set in stone as we like to think they are, so maybe, but probably not. So, when they get home, Calvin tells Mom to guess what they were doing that morning, and she says, I know what you were doing. I saw you playing in your cardboard box. And Calvin says, it only looked like that because we got back as soon as we left. We actually went to the Jurassic. And Mom says, well, it sounds like you had a productive morning. And so, once again, just not really fazed by this.
Yeah, very unfazed by this spectacular experience.
Yeah, but Calvin asks if she can develop the film for him. And so, do you remember when film had to be developed?
I do. You would take your pictures and then you would hope they turned out well, and you'd find out for sure when you got them back.
Yeah, so, for our younger listeners, there was no way to know. And you couldn't just take 1,000 pictures of the same thing so that you'd get at least one good one because you only had so many pictures on your roll of film.
Yeah.
So
how many was it
hope for the best,
actually?
Oh gosh, I'm thinking it was somewhere in the ballpark. Like if you got the expensive kind, you could maybe get somewhere around 50.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was thinking like 40-ish maybe. So
yeah.
So listeners, if you weren't around for that, or you just think of digital technology even as convenient on your phone, not even having to have a separate camera, it's a lot easier now.
Yeah.
Now, Ryan, do you remember when else having film developed was a plot point?
I can think of one. So there's a Sunday strip, I believe. It might have been a daily, but anyway, where Calvin and Hobbes are taking pictures of Hobbes making funny faces. And so Calvin shows the pictures to his dad, and he's like, more pictures of Hobbes? And Calvin says, aren't they a scream? Can I have $10 for another roll of film? So, but that's probably not what you're thinking of, because the other one just popped into my head. Because the one I was just saying doesn't deal with developing the film. It just deals with the film. But there's one where Calvin shrinks down really small and realizes that the only way he can get help is if he sets the automatic timer on his dad's camera and takes a picture of himself, and hopefully they'll get the film developed in time and find him and get medical help or whatever. And so then dad's like, who's this little dot way out in the distance in all these pictures? And so
yeah, I think Calvin's explanation is, beats me, something must be wrong with the camera. Like, yeah. All right, so funnily enough, it actually was the first one I was thinking of, although you're right. That one doesn't talk about developing the film, whereas the one you mentioned does. So yeah, good job with that. But actually the one I was thinking more of was just, when Calvin's dad sees the pictures of Hobbes, like, Calvin is seeing all these hilarious, funny faces that Hobbes made, and the dad is just seeing, like, the stuffed version of Hobbes. All of just these pictures are of Hobbes.
Yeah. Now, Calvin and Hobbes are thrilled with the dinosaur photos they got, and they can't wait to sell them to Time Magazine or, whatever buyer. But when they show them to Dad, asking him to help them with that, he says he didn't realize that dinosaurs looked so small in plastic. Silly
Just
Dad.
What are you implying?
Yeah. So, Calvin's like, Dad doesn't think that these are real pictures of dinosaurs, and he doesn't think museum will pay for or a magazine will pay for these. And he says that he did offer to pay Calvin $1 to pull weeds in the yard, but of course I didn't want the money that bad.
Fair. Pulling weeds
Yeah,
is no fun.
it's not. So there's our second time machine story, and there's one more that we've alluded to that I think is maybe both of our favorite. So
yes. Even though it doesn't have dinosaurs.
No dinosaurs, that's true. But it's using the time machine to try to skip his dumb assignment. So, Andy, would you like to tell us what this assignment is?
Sure. So Calvin is supposed to think up a story to write and then illustrate it. But he says, I can't do this. I can't tell stories.
What about your explanation of the noodle incident?
That wasn't a story. That was the unvarnished truth.
Oh, don't be so modest. You deserved a Pulitzer.
And I think it's funny too, this actually adds another layer to the noodle incident because not only do we never find out what the noodle incident itself was, we also never find out what Calvin's explanation for the incident was.
Yeah. And I say I love imagining it. I don't have a clear vision in mind of what it was or what his explanation might have been, although maybe we'll talk about that in more detail in another episode. But yeah. Such a fun recurring theme.
Oh, definitely. And I would say, I think you'll agree, Calvin's actually a pretty good storyteller.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, so we've got the things like, well, it wasn't me, Dad. It was aliens. It was these horrible little aliens from Pluto, and whatever. So that we've got stories like that, and then also there's kind of some creative storytelling with things like the way he does his snow art and stuff, or the stories that he writes for bedtime, things like that.
Yeah, or some of the poems like we've talked about. I mean, these are basically stories Calvin is telling. So, yeah. I'm with Hobbes on this one.
Yeah. So, once again, this is partly, I think, somebody's making him do it, so it's not fun.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah, if it's just him doing it, then yeah, stories are great. But if he gets an assignment to do it, well, that's where we have the problem.
Right, yeah. But, so we get a couple of strips before the time travel just talking about the assignment itself. He says, I can't turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. And what mood is that?
Last minute panic.
Exactly, which I wonder if that's maybe Watterson's commentary on deadlines, at least in part.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is, but I think this is also relatable. Like, even if you're not someone who procrastinates, it does seem like sometimes it's like you have trouble thinking of something, but then, the closer you get to when it has to be done, it's like, all right, well then, oh, you know what? Inspiration did hit. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, it's true. Necessity is the mother of invention, as most people say, or as Calvin might say, mothers are the necessity of invention.
Yes.
But, yeah. So Hobbes suggests that Calvin just have fun with the creative process, and Calvin says, every time I do that, I wind up in the school psychologist's office.
Now, did your school have a psychologist when you were growing up?
So we had a counselor. I don't know if he had a degree in psychology or whatever, but we did have a counselor that kids could go to if they were dealing with whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like we probably did too, although I can't necessarily remember who they would have been. I mean, obviously, like in high school, we had guidance counselors, but that's more for career things. I'm trying to recall if we had... I think we must have had some kind of counselors, but I don't really remember at the moment.
Yeah, I remember in elementary school we definitely did, and I remember in high school one time, I won't go into the details, but a really bad thing happened, and so there was a kid who was very affected by it, and I walked him down to the counselor's office.
Wow, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was a bad situation, but yes, we did have a counselor.
Okay.
So, good thing to have at a school.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's probably more important than ever these days. But yeah, I agree. It is interesting that Calvin specifically says not just counselor, the school psychologist's office, which sounds, I guess I'll say, more serious, or like they think they need, more attention than just a counselor.
Yeah, this is not for... I don't mean to diminish things, but this is
right,
not,
I didn't
quote unquote,
that.
Just a... Well, I just mean it's not just, and I'm using the word just because I don't have a better word, but I'm not saying that the other thing is unimportant. But it's not just a Calvin needing to talk something out. This is like a, what is your problem, Calvin? Like, what is going on in your head that we need to fix, sort of thing.
Yeah, like he needs a
So,
clinical diagnosis, not just, emotional support.
right, yeah. But
Which,
he finally figures out not how to do the assignment, but how to not have to do the assignment. He says they'll time travel a couple hours into the future and pick up the finished assignment, and Hobbs says, something doesn't make sense here, and I think it's me sitting in this box.
yeah, I have to agree with Hobbes. This actually brings up a bit of a pet peeve of mine about at least some time travel stories, and that's you'll have stories where so the characters are doing whatever, and then we're usually we're saved from calamity by blah blah blah, and then later they get to the point, now we have to go back and do that because we are the ones who saved, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it can't have happened that way. You have to go through the timeline without the time travel until you get to the point of the time travel and then go back. So it's like either it's a different time stream or you change the past somehow. Now, I have a professor who would get mad at me for saying that because she would always say it's not possible to change the past and people are speaking imprecisely. So, Dr. Zegzebski, if you're listening, I'm sorry for that. But anyway, listeners, you get what I mean here. I think it always kind of bugs me where something that the characters will go on to time travel to then do happens in the first place.
Oh yeah, I've got a really egregious example that I would like to share. So another entertainment franchise, for lack of a better word, that I enjoy is Animorphs. So I don't know if any of our listeners are familiar with Animorphs, but it was a book series from the 90s that I really enjoyed. And in one of them, they time travel inadvertently to the time of the dinosaurs, kind of fittingly.
Like we're saying, time travel
Yeah.
usually involves dinosaurs.
Yeah, and as it happens, they go right to the end of the Cretaceous, when the asteroid is almost about to hit. And so they actually see the asteroid coming, getting bigger and bigger in the sky. And they hatch this plan with what turns out there were sentient aliens on Earth in the Mesozoic. And, we just had no idea, but it turns out they were there. So they hatched this plan, not only sentient, but space travel capable. And so they hatched this plan with them to divert the asteroid, but then realized that, if they do that, that will prevent the rise of humanity. And so they sabotage the plan and end up allowing and almost causing the asteroid to hit the Earth, which allows humans to become a thing, which allows them to go back in time to allow humans to become a thing. And right. I hate that.
Yeah, it's like, but it can't be because they went back in time or it wouldn't have happened in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I guess sounds like we have a similar pet peeve about this kind of thing.
Yeah. So I actually think Bill Watterson gets it right here because they travel from 6:30 to 8:30 and ask 8:30 Calvin for the assignment, and he doesn't have it because 6:30 Calvin didn't write it.
Yeah, he's like, well, why didn't you write it? Because 2 hours ago I went to the future to get it.
That's what I said 2 hours ago.
Yeah, so I agree. Yeah, I think that's right. Bill Watterson actually gets it right. Well, no, this couldn't have happened because he didn't do it. How could he have done it if he was going to not do it?
But if it was going to be written, that means I should have written it. So why didn't you? So they go around like that for a while, and then they realize that it's actually 7:30 Calvin's fault. That lazy little punk.
Yeah, he'll get us both in trouble.
Yeah. So 6:30 and 8:30 Calvin go to confront 7:30 Calvin, and they threaten to pound him if he doesn't get writing. But there's a flaw in that plan because they realize that all of them are the same Calvin, so they'll all have to suffer whatever they do to 7:30 Calvin. He's like, go ahead and hit me, it'll be my future self that hurts. And 8:30 Calvin's like, hey!
It's like, wait a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. Whose dumb idea was this anyway? His? His.
Yeah, so then, as you're saying, they figure out they're all the same Calvin because 6:30 Calvin will become 7:30 Calvin, and then they'll both become 8:30 Calvin.
Yeah, so they'll all have to suffer whatever they do to 7:30 Calvin. So while this is all going on, 6:30 Hobbs and 8:30 Hobbs are still hanging out at 8:30, and I like this aspect that the two timelines are somehow happening simultaneously. I think that's great. But uh, so they decide to write a story about Calvin. One of them will write it, and the other will illustrate it. And it's easy to draw Calvin. You just make a big mouth and add some hair, which kind of accurate.
Seems fairly accurate.
Yeah. So Calvin, all of him, are grateful to Hobbes, both of him, and so they have their story, but they don't have time to read it. So mom comes in and says, did you write your story? Well, sort of. I had to do a lot of time traveling to get it. Look, is your story written or not? Oh, it's written. I just haven't read it yet.
Yeah, which again, I mean, we say this more than once, I guess, but I wonder what his mother was thinking at this point. Like, he says, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's just Calvin again. Whatever. I guess it's written. Don't worry about it." Or
Right. And it turns out to be okay because so Calvin takes to school and, okay, class, who would like to read their story? I would.
yeah, he's pretty excited actually.
Yeah, how nice to see you volunteer for a change. All right, what's your story about? I don't know yet, but I'm sure it's good.
Yeah. So again, I wonder what Miss Wormwood was thinking. Like, he doesn't know yet. What?
Yeah. My story is titled How Hobbs the Handsome Tiger Saves the Day. No thanks to Calvin the time-traveling chowderhead. What? Is there a problem? There will be for a certain stripy furball when I get home.
I do have to say that is a pretty good title, honestly.
I like it, yeah. And Miss Wormwood does too, actually.
That's true. And you remember what grade he gets?
Yes, so Calvin's not pleased and he comes home and he's like, okay, you. And Hobbs is like, me? But so he reads Hobbs the Riot Act about that for a second. Then Hobbs is like, what grade did it get? A plus. It says, I'm glad you're finally applying yourself. The tiger narration was a nice touch. But even so.
Yeah, and Hobbs says, wow, really? I should try to send this to the New Yorker.
Which actually, I mean, I think something like that could work. I mean, okay, full disclosure, I have never read a single story in the New Yorker, but it seems like the sort of story that would get published in a magazine that publishes short stories.
That seems fair. And I mean, and like we said, I mean, we both really love this story arc in general. I mean, even we like all of Calvin and Hobbes, but this is one of our favorites. So, given that that basically is the story, I mean, I think it's pretty good, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I don't know exactly how it came off from Hobbes's hand, but I'd read it. I've read it. I like it.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Yeah, so I guess I think kind of like Miss Wormwood thought of it here. It's like, wow, this is actually really creative. Great way to apply yourself. Very imaginative. Well done.
yeah, yeah. It's a great story, and that's the last Time Machine story. And yeah, I think it's my favorite of the three. Although I like all three a lot.
Yeah, same. I like all of them, but this one is a touch above. And I just laugh the most at this one. I love the two Hobbes saving the three Calvins, and I love Calvin's reaction to it. You made my time traveling sound like lunacy. You drew the three of me fighting, and I was a laughing stock, and this. So,
Yeah.
that makes me wonder. He thought that he came off as a laughing stock, which suggests the students were laughing, but could the students have actually just really liked the story and were laughing with him, so to speak?
Yeah, I was just wondering that they were, he took it as laughing at him because he felt like Hobbes had betrayed him, but they were actually going, oh, wow, this is a great story. Like, I was in a creative writing class, and one time I wrote a story and got my classmates laughing when we read it out to each other, and I felt pretty good about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it makes me wonder, like, maybe, what if Calvin's misinterpreting this? Maybe all the students, like, have more respect for him now.
Yeah, yeah, could be. By the way, there's one thing I forgot that this reminded me of, time traveling to the future. In the first Time Machine story, before they come back to the present, as they're on their way to the present, Calvin says, should we go a little further into the future? And Hobbes is like, no. And Calvin says, let's just go a little into the future and see what I'm like as a teenager. And Hobbes says, that's not okay.
Yeah, which raises an interesting question. Like, what do you think that would have been like?
Yeah, I mean, Calvin as a teenager sounds scary to me. Like, it's possible you have some crazy rambunctious kid like Calvin who mellows out as a teenager, but I feel like he's the sort of teenager who's like, jumping off buildings or something. You're doing crazy parkour stuff or whatever. I don't know if that would be Calvin's particular thing, but that he would be doing something crazy, just driving his mom nuts with his own safety and stuff.
That seems reasonable because we see a lot of evidence of this as a 6-year-old too. Like,
Yeah.
oh, mom, you act like I'm not even wearing a bungee cord.
Right. Yeah. And in addition to that, I can imagine him not being a rule follower and, not caring about his assignments in school like he does as a 6-year-old and stuff. So I almost feel like it would be the same sorts of frustrations, but bigger.
Yeah, that's possible. And, Calvin's dad seems to think something like this because in the binocular arc, it says, well, it's not so bad you broke my binoculars. In another 10 years, you'll probably be wrecking my car.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's entirely possible. I mean, I know it's interesting, right? I mean, I could also imagine Calvin sort of, really leaning into his kind of artistic sensibilities and creativity, and maybe he does mellow out in the sense that he's, so invested in that kind of thing. He's this sort of dreamer type who's, I don't know, still maybe not totally sold on what I guess I'll call organized education, but maybe he focuses on certain aspects of it that he excels in somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess if you can find the right creative outlet in school, that could work well for him. But I still don't want to see Calvin as a teenager.
Yeah, it's funny to think too, like I think we mentioned before that Calvin assumes that he'll still be engrossed and singing the anthem once his voice changes. I think I made a comment like, he's 16 or 17 and he's still wearing the hat and talking about how to get rid of slimy girls. We don't think he's probably right about that, but it is funny to imagine.
Yeah, I like that. I like that version. But I'm going to just point out, as I have before, Calvin is eternally 6, so it's speculation, it's a moot point.
That's true. He's 6 forever.
Yeah, which I guess is its own kind of time travel in a way. So, listeners, there are 3 time travel stories to choose from, so this could be an easy choice. What's your favorite time travel story? Anything else you'd like to tell us, you can email us at magiccandh@proton.me. That's magiccandh@proton.me. And we'll have a link in the show notes that you can click on or copy and paste if that's easier.
And whether it's the past of this podcast, the present, or the future, it's always free and there are no ads. So we just want people to come along with us and have fun celebrating this comic strip.
Yes, absolutely. Hop in the time machine and let's go exploring. You've been listening to The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. We'll be releasing 40 episodes all throughout the year, from November 18th, 2025 to November 18th, 2026, to celebrate the 40th anniversary. Our intro and outro music is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, referenced in the Calvin and Hobbes strip published on October 8, 1986. This rendition was performed by the Skidmore College Orchestra and made available under a Creative Commons license on museopen.com. We hope you'll join us next episode for more fun.